Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try and make your world a little weirder. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Nile. And this is a bit of an unusual week for us. We decided neither of us we're doing research today.
Yeah.
Because what are we doing, Kyle?
Well, this week I got with Nile and I said, Nile, I'm sick of this researching business. I can't do it anymore.
We both have done multiple parters recently. It's time for a little
break. Yeah, no more research for us. So the break's going to be indefinite. We're going to kind of just do documentary episodes over and over and over until we're kind of, scraping the bottom of the barrel. And we started with a documentary here in this episode. I hope people are looking forward to us changing the entire format of the show. We may branch out into non-Fortean, non-paranormal documentaries. Maybe we'll do like a cool documentary on...
we'll do like Muscle Shoals and like Blackfish and,
Yeah, we'll do Super Size Me. We'll probably end up doing Super Size Me a couple times.
Yeah, I think that one needs a lot of in-depth analysis.
Were you ever like forced to watch that?
Twice.
You too.
Two different health classes.
Pretty good stuff.
Which we also then, for some reason, watched a Lifetime original movie in the same health class like the week after. So I think that my health teacher just gave up.
Just wanted to. Yeah, that's so. What year would that have been? Like, how old were you? Was this middle school or high school?
So
high school,
probably around 2008, 2009, somewhere in there.
Because I can't remember if I've told this on the podcast before, but I remember a health class in. Oh man, here's the thing. Let me tell you something real quick.
Okay.
You know that I have like a really fucked up, like my memory's not great.
Yeah, it's not the best.
No. So let me just clarify up front that this is one of those memories that it may have been a thing that another student said to me.
Okay.
But it got conflated in my mind, and I don't remember how. Unfortunately, I'm realizing just how badly this represents my brain, what I'm about to say. But in middle school, I have a memory of a teacher who did a health class, and students were like asking her about different like sex moves. And she was, and they were like asking her like, "Oh, have you done this?" And she would be like, "Yeah."
Wait, the kids were asking the teacher what she had personally done?
Yeah, and you know what? Saying this out loud makes me think this actually didn't happen.
I kind of fucking hope not. Jesus Christ.
Well, yeah, because this woman would have had to have been fired. I think what happened here, now that I'm saying this out loud, because I don't know if I've said this out loud before, but now that I'm like vocalizing it, I think this didn't happen, and another student told me that it did. And I have such a beautiful imagination that I could picture the whole event going down.
Let's not say even a hint of the teacher's name so as not to insinuate
I don't even remember.
anything.
No. I don't even remember who this was. I think this was like, I genuinely don't know who this was.
See, the weirdest thing that this is the thing that deadass did happen in my elementary school. So I think this would have been...
I have one to follow yours
5th or 6th grade, I think.
Yeah.
I forget which year it was because anyway, I can picture what classroom I was in. A kid, like you always have those assholes in your sex ed units that have to like try to pop the room,
Yeah.
And one kid asked, so can you get stuck like a dog? And I remember our elementary school guidance counselor who was doing the sex ed for whatever, I think because almost all the teachers were female and this was the split the crew. And the teacher, the guidance counselor was very taken back by that question and tried to maintain professionalism, but that one did almost break the room.
You do. I feel like if you're a teacher in that situation, you just have to tell them yes. You have to say, yes, that will happen.
Yeah.
That's funny as fuck. I have a very vivid memory of this is a person you probably wouldn't have ever known, and I'm not going to say their name, and they're definitely not listening to this podcast. But there was a kid. We had like our 6th grade sex ed, which was very, it was super low key. Like there wasn't anything. It wasn't crazy or anything. They just put us in front of a video that was like, you're gonna have hair in weird parts, and here's a diagram of a penis. And, I'm sure. And so I guess masturbation was brought up at some point in that video. And I have a very vivid memory. This I know happened. This one is vivid enough in my brain and I remember reacting to it. One of the kids put his, like, the teacher's like, does anybody have any questions after watching that? And one of the kids put their hand up and goes, yeah, is masturbation the thing where you go like this? And then he just makes the like most rapid jerk off motion you've ever seen in front of this teacher. And I don't remember what the teacher said. I'm assuming they were like, well, I mean, I guess
that's one way of doing it.
That's one way of doing it, but I don't know why, but that makes me laugh. Thinking about that's very funny to me. But yeah, the whole thing about the teacher describing sex moves probably didn't happen. It's very like, it's very weird. Do you ever, okay, am I insane? Do you ever have memories where you like, you internally like remember it happening, but then as soon as you start talking about it, you're like, wait, that probably didn't actually happen, and I'm like remembering something else?
Oh, for
or
sure.
Like I've conflated like dreams or movies with reality before as a kid. Like,
yeah, I was about to make a joke about how the plot of Rocky happened to me, but no, I think that that is the thing that happens. Like the biggest form of like false memory that I think I experience is the stuff that your parents have told you about your childhood throughout your life that you don't have any direct memories of, but because the story has been told to you enough times, you feel like you do. Yeah. And so like I can picture things that I definitely have no actual memory of experiencing, but in reality is just because I've been told the story enough times.
Well, and I think he's been on our podcast exactly one time many years ago, but our friend Riley, our mutual friend Riley, will not let it go that I told, like a number of years ago, I told them that my dad, when he was younger, was in a Spin Doctors cover band.
Yep.
I
also want to bring that up as often as possible because it was like
it's very out of pocket, right? So
this is a thing that you said to us, to multiple different groups of friends that I was in for almost a decade.
Look. Here's the thing about that. I genuinely believed it for the longest time. Yeah. I don't know where it came from. Like, I don't know what memory got jumbled up in my brain where my dad told me he was in a Spin Doctors cover band, but it stuck there, apparently. Just to be clear, my dad was never in a Spin Doctors cover band. No. That doesn't make any fucking sense knowing my dad, which Nile kind of knows my dad. And so something's wrong with my mind, and that's just how it is, I guess.
See, this is how we can get into it, because I feel there's something to do with like the idea of false memories and your brain playing tricks on you and everything. Because today we did watch a documentary based on a subject of a previous It Gets Weird episode. Yeah. It is episode 297 about one Elizabeth Klarer and her extraterrestrial love interests.
Yeah, South African contactee.
Yeah.
So Nile.
Yes.
Can I vibe check you here? Because like,
sure.
We both watched this. And I'm curious overall how you feel, but I feel like there's a little bit of a journey to be taken with this documentary.
Yeah, okay. So my overall vibe is that it was interesting to watch, but I don't exactly know who this this is maybe one of the toughest for me in terms of who is this documentary for, which is our like end of the show question for these episodes. I do not have an answer to that question, because I don't think even a person who did a full podcast episode on Elizabeth Klarer, was really the person this documentary is for.
Yeah, Yeah,
because it's
I don't
such
know.
a weird mixture of like, okay, we'll get into this in terms of tone going forward, because the tone of this documentary and the goal of this documentary is very mixed to me in a way that
Yeah,
I
I
don't
agree.
fully understand the intent behind it. Because it's not an unflinching, realistic portrayal of fact. It's also not a loving portrait of a woman that had a wild life. It's also not a skeptic or particularly believer documentary. It is very. It feels like it also has like a random, dip into like Chernobyl and stuff later. Like,
Yeah,
it takes some turns that make me very confused as to exactly what this is for.
yeah. So this is written, directed, and produced by Uga Carlini, who is I don't know who this is, but she's
We also have
ahead.
not said the name of the documentary yet.
Oh yeah, sorry. It's called Beyond the Light Barrier, and it came out this year.
Yes.
Yeah, written, directed, and produced by Uga Carlini and narrated by Dr. John Kani. And yeah, I would say that's a pretty accurate assessment. That like, I'm not sure what the point of this was. Although I would say it seems to lean more in the direction of like, I don't know. It's very, I don't know. It's super weird.
If I were to just watch the first half of this documentary, I would put it pretty squarely in the, this is just looking at the friends and family of an experiencer and kind of how different people believe and disbelieve and how that all kind of exists in the same community. And then the second half of the documentary goes in an entirely different direction.
Yeah, it's like the vast majority of this documentary is about this woman, and it does seem to sort of be a lot of people squarely in the camp of believing, mostly believing Elizabeth Klarer's story.
Or like even some doubters who liked her as a person enough that they aren't going to like fight her on it, you know?
Yeah, well, the thing is, the most doubt you get is like there's one person who's like a pretty hardline skeptic, and I feel like the documentary paints him as kind of like not very friendly about it.
Oh, he gets the villain edit for sure. We'll talk about him.
But then like beyond that, like anybody else who's like mildly skeptical is just that they're mild, and they're they kind of just conclude with, I don't know whether or not there's extraterrestrial life. But then all the other kind of tidbits that are in support of Elizabeth Klarer's story is all very glowing, and like how it's painted as if it's like irrefutable at points. It's like, so I think it's very much like you said, the first half of this is very, very, I think, blatantly like trying to get you on Elizabeth Klarer's side. But then the absolute shift, because like you said, it very much starts as this like, here's this person's life, here are the things, here are the people who have met her and talked to her and know her story and blah, blah, blah. And here's footage of Elizabeth Klarer talking about her experiences and stuff. But then it suddenly has like a message to say, which is wrapped up in the supposed alien contact that Elizabeth Klarer has, but it's still like, it still feels very disjointed the way that it's laid out in the documentary. So, God, I mean, this documentary also, it starts with the Voyager Golden Record recording, and like this man,
which is funny because we just watched for the Patreon an episode of the X-Files that also starts with the gold record.
Yeah, and so like it starts off very like space vibey. And there's this man who is Dr. John Kani, who is like throughout the documentary, like he's cut in during interviews where like you'll be watching an interview with somebody and then it'll cut to footage of Dr. John Kani sitting in a room or on a chair, and the interview is being like projected in front of him or onto him. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what that device was about, but when you get to a certain point in the documentary, I thought it was going to be this radical turn and sudden thing. I can't talk about it yet, but we'll get there. So
okay. So let me start here. Just a very, 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 very quick synopsis of who Elizabeth Klarer is. She was a meteorologist in South Africa who, during the late 1950s, started to become involved in the UFO community when she witnessed a UFO and an encounter with an alien being on top of a mountain, where she then found out that this alien was her soulmate named Akon. Or Akon. They call him. There are a lot of accents in this movie that make it very hard to figure out exactly how you should pronounce that name. But it's an alien from the planet Meton. So I guess we'll kind of just leave it at that. And this led to a series of encounters, which led to Claire having 2 children with this alien being who now live on this other planet and travel the stars and everything. And so she has children on Earth, or she calls them Earth children, and also Sky children, and then started to write books about the planet Meton after she visited it, and or a book, Beyond the Light Barrier is the name of her book. And she basically proselytized this experience for the rest of her life before she died in 1994. So that is the briefest possible rundown of Clara that I can give. If for more, go to episode 297.
There's a lot of details, and there's, she has a lot of flowery prose about making love to the beautiful alien Venusian Akon, which, this is not a new trope in the contactee, the alien experience thing, especially from this era.
Well, he's actually from Alpha Centauri. You're confusing with the little revelation at the end of the episode, at the end of the documentary. The Venusian thing.
Right. I'm sorry.
Was the first manuscript. We'll talk about that because it's funny how this documentary is in part set up like a Wikipedia entry where there's just a controversy section at the end.
That is very true. And here's the thing: like, they show a painting of Akon throughout the film, and it's indistinguishable from like the Nordic alien style alien, which is typically a Venusian, right? Like,
yes.
They're these tall, white, humanoid people with blonde hair and like gray eyes and stuff. Like it's. He pretty much looks like that, but you're right. He's from Alpha Centauri, so my bad.
You might even say that she just took a Venusian and set it somewhere else. Because, so the Nordic is, you're 100% on point with what you're saying with the type of alien. It just is, in her canon, it is technically from Alpha Centauri.
You're right. God. So Elizabeth Klarer passed away in 1994. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised that there are still people who are like devout believers of her stuff. But this documentary does a lot of interviewing of people who were like they have footage of Clara herself talking about this stuff, but they also have family members and like friends of the family and like people who lived in the area and their children who lived in the area, things like that. And there's a location called, it's just called UFO Hill or something.
UFO Mountain, I think.
UFO, or Flying Saucer Hill, sorry.
Flying Saucer Hill. There you go.
So, like, there's like a whole mythology built up in this area about flying saucers. And Elizabeth Klarer seems to kind of be the center of it. And there's I don't know, like I said, so much of it is like they interview a nurse who they straight up get a nurse who I guess was bedside at hospice when Elizabeth Klarer was in hospice, and she talks about how whenever sex with aliens was brought up, it would like perk up her ears, and she
which happened very commonly just in the nursing home.
Of course, and how she always stuck to her story up even on her deathbed. And I kind of want to throw out just like a sort of broad theory about Elizabeth Klarer after seeing this documentary. I think so. One of the sort of questions that will pop up if you are a skeptic if like I would say I'm a skeptic of a story like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty skeptical of the contactee stories, but I do find them very interesting. I find her story interesting because I think it's, you know, more psycho-socially revealing than anything. Um, I just like, I hear these stories and I'm skeptical, and the question usually comes down to, well, why tell this story? Like, why be so adamant about this story? In most cases, it's because people can make money off of it. That's just the truth. Most of the time, people are able to sell books and do seminars. It does seem like Elizabeth Klarer got to do some of that too. Like, she has books.
And she went on the circuit and stuff.
Yeah, she went on the circuit. So there is that incentive. At the same time, it is also kind of like, why other than just the sort of like really base monetary incentive, why come up with the story? And I think that she just gives me this sense of just the stories that she tells and how she tells it just gives me the sense that she, like so many people, was just very afraid of dying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you think that that's a pretty good assessment of like what's going on with her story here? Because like she's often talking about how, you know, like there's no death on Meton. They've moved beyond death, and like Meton will welcome humanity once we fix our shit up.
Yeah.
And like,
I mean,
she's talking about how horrible it is to age. Like, she's in this interview talking about how horrible it is to age, and that they don't have to deal with that. So I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's just that, like, as so many things come down to just human mortality or something.
I mean,
don't know.
I think that probably played a role on it. I am. Anytime I'm looking at stuff from this time period, which the sightings happened in the late 50s, early 60s, I am like just it's so impressed upon me the effect that the world harnessing nuclear bombs has on like an entire generation of people.
Yeah.
Like the whole Space Brothers thing really feels like a response to the like idea of nuclear annihilation and society coming to grapple with that as a concept. And
Sure,
like,
yeah.
So all of this stuff about, you know, the aliens are coming here. They're such an advanced civilization that has better medicine, technology, everything than us. And they also are peaceful and are telling us not to bomb each other. It feels like the cultural unconscious grappling with the concept of an entirely new form of destructive power.
Yeah.
And the effect that has on the collective mind, you know?
Definitely. And like, so yeah, and I mean that's still, and that also kind of wraps back around to mortality.
Death,
it's like,
yeah, it is.
And like, so I feel like that's kind of hand in hand with a lot of the Space Brothers stuff. Because yeah, the nuclear annihilation thing is definitely important to this era of contactee stuff. I find that it's just like, you know, I don't know, the sex with aliens thing, like, you could like kind of have a very like, you know, like, oh well, people, you know, what would people want to do with an alien if they met one for real? Well, they'd want to fuck it. But at the same time, I think there's just this point of like child rearing is sort of like this life affirming thing for people, and so the idea that like you could have a child that would go off to another planet and live forever in a way means you live on forever.
Yeah. And like, if I remember correctly from doing the research for the episode, the whole thing is that like that her space children are like on a ship with their dad, just like going and exploring the galaxy. And like, you know, it's that kind of wish fulfillment of, oh, my son's never going to die and he's having the greatest adventures across the galaxy kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it really just like I don't know. I think a story like this is born out of fear of annihilation, and then you realize you can make money off of it, and you can like live your life by telling this story. So why wouldn't you just keep telling it? So Yeah, that's kind of my overall assessment. I mean, you could kind of apply this to a lot of contactee stories too.
Yeah.
There's other things that are at play in certain stories, like George Adamski's a whole thing. There's like a whole angle to that that's like more conspiratorial, that he had CIA contact that may have like he may have worked with the CIA to, who knows. That's its own fucking can of worms that I have to open at some point. But I don't really get that impression here. It just seems to be one of those contactees who, for whatever reason, was able to resonate with people and had, I guess, enough of a charming personality that they could just live off of, doing this.
Yeah. I think there is that aspect to it. I do want to talk a bit about do you want to get into some of the people that they interview in this?
Yeah.
Because we'll talk about the big bad here in a second, but I think that it's important to start with they talk to one of her sons, David Klarer.
David, yeah.
And he is throughout the whole, I keep wanting to say episode, throughout the documentary, they come back to him, and he has had his own ET experience as an adult, but it wasn't with any people from Meton. They don't actually tell you more about that. Like, he doesn't go in depth into his own personal experience, but he does recount stuff from his childhood, and specifically, there's an encounter with Akon that he was supposedly there for in his mother's book.
Yeah,
that he has no memory of.
She tells in her story, she claims that her son was with her when they were on some sort of trip and they met with Akon. Now, importantly, David says, I remember other parts of that trip, but not meeting Akon.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. He basically says, well, some people, have I considered that Akon wiped my memory? Yes, but, why would he do that? And he points out one of the weird things that you find with a lot of these contactee stories where Elizabeth's contact and her writing the story is all about this. Well, we need to get the story of Akon and Meton and the Space Brothers out to the people, out to humanity. So why erase her son's mind if they're trying to put this story out into the world? That is a good question, I think. And it's a contradiction that you run into with a lot of the contactee stories, where this is such an important story the world needs to know, but also the aliens don't want to be seen or meet other people, and they don't want certain people to know certain things. It's weird, and it seems inconsistent to me.
Oh, at some point we have to come to terms with the fact that either the aliens are just really fucking bad at this shit, or people are lying. And there's an Occam's razor to that. But the idea that all of these different people have been given this message to save humanity and to proselytize the word of these advanced space beings, and they keep just giving that message to a random, affectionately weirdo, that has it comes off as poor planning on the part of a super advanced being and race, that they would put all of this There's something about the chosen one narrative that works in fiction because you control all the aspects of it, but when you try to transplant that into the real world, it doesn't make any goddamn sense whatsoever.
Yeah,
and that very much becomes a thing that you have to grapple with if you want to pay attention to UFO abductee stories at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of. In fact, one of my favorite quotes in the documentary is, while trying to listen to this lady's thick South African accent, at one point they're interviewing farmers who live in the area. And I didn't write down the names of these people because they weren't they were just random locals.
Yeah.
And one of the women that they talk to talks about the story, and she says a lot of things that I'm like, what is she saying? But one of the things that she says is about Elizabeth Klarer is, there's a lot of holes in her story, but take the pearls from it.
Yeah.
which is such a funny attitude to have about what could be the most important discovery for humankind, which is the existence of extraterrestrial life. Like, it's like we have this absurdly crazy like story that has huge ramifications for humanity. It may or may not be true, but let's just take parts of it that seem true and keep those, and everything else, all the holes we can cover those up with something. I feel like that's the attitude a lot of the times, and because like there's a lot of people who say stuff kind of similar to that, where like a lot of the times the people seem to like need to qualify their statements about Elizabeth Klarer with like, there may or may not be aliens. I don't know, but isn't she nice? Like,
yeah, there's a lot of like people are too polite to push back for her. Like a lot of the people that they interview for this documentary just seem like they don't really want to be here talking about it. Like Elizabeth was nice enough. Some of them are, yes. There are some people that are dead that are very much there, but it really feels like some of them are just like people that she knew that are like, you want to talk? Okay, yeah, I'll say what I can. I'll give you a 30-second soundbite, I guess. Sure. It is kind of weird in that aspect with some of the people that their whole thing basically amounts to, yeah, she always said she fucked an alien. I just kind of let her go with it.
Yeah.
And then they move on. Like, yeah, it is interesting.
I want to ask you about, so like, I guess we'll get into this now, but one of the people that gets interviewed, like he's brought up multiple times, is Credo Mutwa, who is a Zulu Sangoma traditional healer, Hai Sanusi. He's like an South African spiritual healer, I believe. And I got the impression, like, I don't know much about like what a person like that does, but he's like the most important like Zulu Sangoma currently alive, I think is what they were saying, right? Am I remembering that right?
I believe so. I don't know enough about that to really say much, but I believe that is what they said.
But apparently this guy had a pretty close bond with Elizabeth Klarer, to the point where they mentioned at one point that at the height of, and I'm going to throw this word out there, and I want everybody to keep it in mind, but apparently at the height of South African apartheid, go ahead and take that word apartheid and put it in your little pocket for later. Apparently Elizabeth Klarer and Credo Mutwa would be arrested for like visiting each other during apartheid.
Yeah, like fraternizing effectively.
Yeah, and there's like a lot of strange things that he says. Like, for instance, like he's like, you all know the story of Elizabeth Klarer, that she is a human who lived here and had a child with an alien off on another planet and blah blah blah. He says that, but he's like, that's not the truth. Elizabeth Klarer is a child of the stars, and his evidence for that is that she has ears that are not quite right, so she covers them up with her hair all the time. But if you look at her ears, they're weird, and so she's an alien. Actually, she is from the stars.
And I think they're weird in a way that he likens to some sort of traditional like god depiction in art of the area. Like there's some connection there that I didn't fully grasp, because this movie spends a lot of time on things that I already know and then zooms past things that I do not understand. So
yeah, like one of the things that they bring up as like proof, every single thing in this documentary that is brought up as quote unquote proof is so like blatantly thin. It's like really bizarre. Like one of the things that they bring up is I guess at one point Elizabeth showed somebody a book that she had, a like 45-page book that was, I think, like from the United States Air Force's like notes on her.
Yeah.
And it was like proof that they were highly interested in her story with Akon. But like, again, like you don't like see the book. There's no, it's like, I don't know. It's nothing to go on. Like, okay, so they have the FBI or whoever, or the Air Force has files on Elizabeth Klarer, who is doing fucking circuits around the world talking about UFOs. Like, they
have
probably
files
do
on
have
everybody.
files on her. Like,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I don't even know if these actually exist. Maybe they do, but I wouldn't take it as like, slam the book shut proof on her story. There's nothing, because nothing is presented that is like, that feels like proof, because frankly, like so many of these fucking stories, there isn't any proof that any of this actually happened.
Yeah, the proof that we're talking about here is literally basically her statement recounting what she claims to have experienced that was submitted to the United States Air Force.
Yeah.
Like, it isn't their investigation. It's not like a field agent's notes or anything. It is basically her just recounting every detail that she could give them about her experiences with these aliens. So it only proves that is what she wrote down, you know?
Yeah, and like here's the thing that I would suggest to people making documentaries about stuff like this, about contactees, about UFO. I am really just stop trying to put anything. Stop trying to put forward evidence. Just don't bother. Like, unless you have some sort of crazy ass fucking like. It always serves to do the opposite of what it's trying to do, which is like convince you. I just find it like detrimental to like the narrative. It's like, if you want to tell this lady's narrative and her perspective on this, like, just don't even bother trying to like force some bullshit about evidence, because it never works. And I think it just like, I'm here for the story, like regardless of whether or not it's true. Just tell me the story, you know.
Yeah.
That's how I see it, at least. So back to Credo. What I wanted to say about that. Okay. What is your reading on this guy? Because he does certainly seem to be the way he talks, it does give you the impression that he sort of like believes her. And I guess, I have to assume that they really did have this like close relationship. There's the really weird part where I'm trying to find his name because I wrote him down. But there's the guy, Dr. James Hurtak, the founder of Academy for Future Science, where he's talking to Credo, and this is like older footage, I think, and he's showing him like a photo of an alien that was supposedly an alien body recovered at a crash in where did he
South America?
Did he say South? Yeah. One of them is from New Mexico, I think. I think he just straight up says New Mexico, right?
He shows them a couple different things. So yeah, I think there's one from New Mexico and there's one from like Brazil or something.
Which, like, if New Mexico, like, that whole scene felt extremely weird to me. And I would assume that because he says this is a body recovered from a crash in New Mexico, I'm assuming he means Roswell. And every single time somebody has made a thing like a photo or a video of a body being taken from Roswell, it's always been proven to be fake. So it's super fucking weird, that whole scene, because it's just Credo. Credo doesn't say anything in this footage. He just sits there as Dr. James Hurtak, this guy, just shows him all this stuff and is just like, the Zulu people they've described things like this before, and it's what you would call in your language these alien beings, like you have a word for them, and we found one in Roswell. There's also South American UFOs that have been seen, and he's just saying that to Credo, who's just sitting there kind of like staring at him the whole time. It's really, I don't know. So there are some vibes in this documentary that are extremely off for me.
Well, that specific
maybe it's because they're South African. I don't know.
Maybe. That really felt like they were using the B-roll to a different documentary, just like slotting it in there. Like, it had that vibe where this would make sense in the context of another movie. But because of that, they just had new interview footage of Kurtak narrating over this old B-roll of him and Credo talking and looking at these photos of aliens and stuff and UFOs, and it just, I don't know. It just felt like they were using the B-roll to a different documentary, just like another movie. But because of that, they just had new interview footage of Kurtak narrating over this old B-roll of him and Credo talking and looking at these photos of aliens and stuff and UFOs, and it just, I don't know. It it just has a strange, like, I don't know if this was budgetary. I don't know why there's the kind of this mishmash of like 3 animated sequences, some old archival footage. All of the Klarer old footage makes sense because she's dead. But then they like just edit in these random things that just feel like old B-roll. And I don't exactly know why.
Well, we're trying to hit that tight 90 minutes, you know?
Yeah.
There's other really weird moments in here. Like there's the guy Bob Forbes.
Yeah, let's talk about Bob here, Mr. Sculptor
Yeah,
Bob.
very strange. I can't remember if we talked about him in the original episode, but
I don't think so.
This guy claims that he like mentally called upon Akon, and after calling upon Akon, he created a sculpture, like a bust of Akon, and like brought it. I think like either Elizabeth found him or he went to her. And when she saw the bust, she was like, "Oh my God, that's Akon," and she was very excited. So, like, the story suggests that he was able to psychically communicate with Akon to create an image of him, which was then confirmed by Elizabeth later on. And he also like makes this weird mention of how like a sculpture like this would normally take him like X amount of time, but you know,
like 3 weeks.
Yeah, like 3 weeks, but this took him like 24 to 48 hours or something to like put together. Yeah. And
he got a little thank you from Akon after it, because a week later after he made this bust, his son was looking out the window and saw these 13 lights bobbing up and down on the horizon.
Yeah.
And when like he went to go look at it and he talked to Klarer about it, and she said that was Akon and his squadron was the word that was used. Like basically just doing like a drive-by saying hi and thanking him for the bust. It's so that whenever people try to like write human niceties onto aliens, I'm always so confused by it.
I think the reason you're confused is because it comes across very stupid. And you know, it's like, I commissioned a bust of you. Could you pay me? You know, like
we'll pay you an exposure to aliens.
Yeah, exactly.
He's very like, that's a very short thing. I wish he would spend more time with the fucking channeling sculptor, you know, because that's an interesting vibe.
This is a trope that we have, I think, established with many of these documentaries about stuff like this, where like you can't spend too much time on an extremely bizarre little tidbit like that, because like, you know, just don't give you too much time to think about how absurd that all sounds. And just like move on from the really wild thing that somebody just said or described.
Well, you're 100% right bringing that up, because now we go into hyperdrive on that specific concept, because in the documentary, after we get through the sculpture part, we basically just get like 4 quick like snapshots of different South African UFO encounters and contactees in a row. Like
it kind of was like, at this point was like kind of pissing me off, because like one of them that they talk about was this retired airline captain,
who they claim was headhunted for Project Blue Book.
Yeah, which like, again, I don't know. And literally all he says is like, yeah, one time I was flying my plane on a clear night and I saw a weird light that zipped off, and the documentary is just like, you know, he can vouch for UFOs. And like another thing, it's like David Klarer, I think himself says, somebody in the documentary is like, yeah, it was David Klarer, where he's like, you know, I saw something in the sky and it was unidentified, therefore it was a UFO by definition. But like, I don't know what that was. Like, I don't know if it's aliens, maybe. Like, there's a lot of people who talk like that as well. But the way the documentary kind of like frames a lot of those moments is as if they are confirmation of the existence of extraterrestrial visitation.
They use the fact that his sighting was labeled unexplained by Project Blue Book to prop up the fact that, like, to try to add credence to all of this stuff. They're specifically using these stories that have like tangentially not been disproven to try to like prop up everything else this documentary is trying to say. And it goes through a couple of these, and then it goes into one that we've actually covered on this podcast. I don't know if you remember the aerial school UFO encounter from episode 146.
The aerial UFO encounter is pretty unforgettable just because of all the wild details. But this is another. They go for a while talking about these school children who all see the UFO and the investigators that showed up there. It spends a little time on that, which that would also be a pretty good documentary. I had seen that footage before though. So, but it is an interesting story. Again, not there's nothing about that story that like, I guess I don't know. I get so, I just get very frustrated by people who are just like taking these claims at face value. It's like, why? A group of children can say and see a lot of things. But
Kyle, when they ask them as adults, they all kept their story.
It's true. I don't know. That's just not a confirmation of anything to me, but it is again, it's there to back up the existence of UFOs and visiting specifically the South Africa region. Which again, I would just like to point out, is a region that suffered under terrible apartheid. I'm not going to get too deep on the history there, but like, I recommend looking into it if you don't know anything about that. It's, and that's maybe part of the why I get such weird vibes from all the fucking white people in this documentary is like, I don't know. I see them and I think of Elon Musk.
Oh, when we haven't gotten to, is it time to talk about the ending of this documentary?
We're gonna transition to that now, because what happens next is when that Dr. Hurtak guy starts talking with Credo about aliens. We then get an interview with Dr. Credo or Dr. Hurtak, who maybe he's a real doctor. Like so many of these UFO people are quote unquote real doctors. And he starts talking about UFOs visiting nuclear facilities, and that UFOs can show up and turn off these nuclear facilities, and that this is a message, and that we humanity lost control when we dropped the first nuke. And I just want to also point out that this moment is followed up by some of the South African women who seem to be more on Elizabeth Klarer's side. They were like family friends and like people who lived in the area, these like older women. And one of the women says something to me, Jesus Christ, not to me. One of the women says that like, something quote unquote has to be done about the aggression, wars, and overpopulation in the world. Which is a very alarming thing, I think. Like the documentary kind of like plays it off as like, as meaning like there needs to be a peaceful resolution to these problems, but like she's equating like the quote unquote problem of overpopulation with like the visitation of aliens who are telling us how we should like live our lives for the betterment of humanity. And that's also, I don't know, it just feels very, it feels sort of like, how these like sort of new agey, like spiritual UFO connection things, they can just start to lean a little fascist. So when you say something must be done about overpopulation, what are you saying exactly?
Who gets to decide who does what there?
And furthermore, I've talked about this multiple times on the podcast at this point, but like, there's a pretty good argument for why overpopulation isn't really a thing that's happening, and we just don't effectively use the spaces that we have and all this stuff. But if you want to hear all about that, go check out my episode on Bill Gates and the overpopulation conspiracy, which is, God, I don't know how many years ago now. But anyways, point is, this is when we get to the point where they start interviewing a guy who is a Ukrainian guide who works in the exclusion zone at Chernobyl. And this is so, again, this is another guy where like he basically was like, I don't know about UFOs, but I can talk to you about the exclusion zone. Like,
Yeah.
It's, oh God.
All right.
So yeah, this is where things begin to take a turn in the documentary. Because at this point, his like, it's very clearly beginning to it's starting to make this like pro-environmental message, which is like, that's fine. And it does fall in step with like Space Brothers and the like message of like humanity needs to treat the world and themselves better and all that, that's a running theme. But like, then he starts to talk about like, it was theorized that like animals would not be able to live in the exclusion zone, and that's been counter to what like it's actually not been the case. Like animal life has really like bounced back in the exclusion zone, but humans won't bounce back. So and then we start running like fucking nuclear explosion simulations around the world. And we talked to a guy who I think made a very legitimate documentary about weaponizing space, Dennis Delestrac, about how like there's space debris and trash that we put up there, and we're just like self-annihilating slowly, and eventually we could potentially self-annihilate rapidly with nuclear proliferation. So like, again, very legitimate concerns. My problem is hinging these concerns on the story of Elizabeth Klarer's contact with an alien who fucked her.
Yeah, it does. There is something interesting about the juxtaposition of I went into this documentary kind of expecting Love and Saucers, and ended up getting something strangely close in feeling to Birdemic, where randomly in the third act it turns into an anti-nuclear proliferation and pro-environmentalist message, which is fine. I am anti-nuclear war and pro-environment.
I'm pro-nuclear war, but pro-environment, and I have a lot of conflicting. I contain
this is why we work so well together.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, because we really offer both sides of,
exactly.
of the argument here, and it helps to give us a fair coverage. So, it hits you with like a 1-2 punch of all of the like kind of fashy stuff that comes out of the Space Brothers mentality. And then it just drops like a couple other quick things. Yeah. And then just ends. Like,
yeah. Okay. So
the ending of this documentary is absurd.
It's so well. And the thing is, I was almost stoked by how it ended. I was ready for it to be something utterly different than what it had set up. But it wasn't really. So, there's a couple other really wild tidbits that they throw at you. This is where Elizabeth starts to talk about how the people of Meton don't die. They have like these self-rejuvenating fruits and vegetables, and that's all they eat. And so there's also like kind of getting thrown in with all the pro-environmental, anti-nuclear war stuff. There's like a little slight mild nod towards like maybe we should be vegetarians or whatever. They never say it explicitly, but that's kind of, I think, the implication. Because like the whole culmination of all this is like we need to be more like Akon and the people of Meton, right?
Yeah.
And at one point they even throw in another skeptic guy who gets a very brief moment to like, I don't even remember I didn't even have time to write down who this fucking person was, because they get literally one moment to basically say what is effectively, yeah, I don't know about aliens, but they're right about how we're in trouble. And then they cut away from that guy immediately to Credo, who's then just like, they don't listen in their parliament of lies. They're sitting in their offices doing nothing. And they need to embrace this message. And so oh God, it's so, it's just really strange the way that this all bounces back and forth. And there, like we said, there is the main skeptic guy who I have him in my notes here somewhere.
Paul Bagan.
Yes, thank you. And
Paul Bagan gets the absolute villain edit in this documentary, and I don't have anything to go against that, because he's the couple little snippets you get of him, he comes off like kind of a dickhead. But yeah, I don't know. What were you gonna say about Bagan?
Well, just that like he does say he does say very reasonable things. And at the very end of the documentary, he's like, again, very like shoulder shrug, like, I don't know, what's true, but it's, I don't know. He gives off, again, a very weird vibe where like he was sort of like, he almost seemed sort of tongue in cheek, like he knew that he was like gonna get the goat of like the believers, like and also just like he's just painted like kind of rude because like there's a whole thing where like people are really really romanticizing Elizabeth Klarer's relationship with this supposed alien and having a child with him and people are talking about how beautiful and amazing that is. And then it just cuts to him saying like, that's not a love story. He comes here, he gives her a baby and he leaves. Like, and I'm like, yeah, man, I agree with you.
Yeah, but then he takes it a step further and goes, that's not like the perfect love story. The perfect love story is like me and my wife who have been together for so many years, but that's not sensational enough. That's what people should be idolizing, and it comes off this kind of petulant way that makes him like he's the downer to this documentary, other than the actual ending where we get into the controversy section. But it feels like he's being led to intentionally kind of incendiary responses and edits by whoever's interviewing him, because he's always seems kind of incredulous when they cut to him. Like he's already a little wound up whenever they actually show him. So I feel like there's probably a lot on the cutting room floor where he comes off a little more measured.
Yeah, maybe. It's hard to say, maybe
because
he
you're
really
right.
is.
He says like reasonable things. You're right. Like the things he says are reasonable, but the way he says them and the way they're edited into this movie make him feel like the villain.
Definitely. And I'm curious if there really is anything that was cut out from what he said, but who knows? So the last thing that kind of leads us into our wild ending is they talk about how like Elizabeth was trying to reconstruct the sort of like technology that she saw while on Meton and all the stuff that like power the light system that powers his ship and like how they like create like the synthetic foods that reproduce themselves. And there's some bullshit in there that I just straight up don't believe, that she was in a conference with like 22 scientists from around the world who gave her a standing ovation for her presentation about this. That sounds completely made up to me. Like I'm sure she went to some sort of fucking conference with people, but like, I just don't believe that scientists were like, my God, she's brought back the metonic technology, because it's just absurd.
Because I mean, we so far I can't go to Walmart and purchase any Meton technology.
Not as far
I don't
as I
think
know.
she actually had the full blown schematics.
I mean,
or anything.
all of this could be everything we're saying could be absolutely for naught, because maybe a government stepped in and took all that shit away so that we couldn't actually have it, and they're using it for their nefarious means. So if there's one point for the conspiracy brained people, but then we have this actor who shows up. And the narrator's like, I worked with this guy, and he's also producing a play about Elizabeth Klarer's life. And this is where I wanted to jump off of a fucking building, because this guy is talking about her and he's like, oh, I'm reading her book and it's amazing. And it's almost beyond belief that she did those things. And I'm like, yeah, almost, huh? And he starts talking just absolute fucking nonsense, in my opinion. He starts talking about like moving in the stillness and how important that is, and how Elizabeth Klarer was moving in the stillness. And you can yell all you want about a thing to get your idea out there, but she's in the stillness and that's important or whatever. And it was just fucking meaningless nonsense, in my opinion. Whatever he was saying, it was bullshit. I don't know what you took away from that guy, but I was like, this is...
I'm with you too. Like he was he was just kind of saying nonsense most of the time. And I don't... I didn't get much from him, honestly.
Now, here's where we get to what I can it's a racism jump scare.
Yeah. Well, we first get a plagiarism jump scare, and then we get there's this thing where they randomly just cut to a bookstore in South Africa that specializes in like old books and rare books, and they're like, there's been accusations of plagiarism, but I checked it all out, and it seems like she just was using stuff as reference. So I don't think she's like plagiarism.
She's like, oh, I'm an academic, I'm not an academic or a scientist or anything. She just referenced these other books, and so if you want to accuse her of plagiarism, you have to accuse everybody in this field of plagiarism, which I'm like, you know what? Interesting. You know what? I'm going to think about that statement a little bit more.
Maybe. But then, we get the racism jump scare.
Yeah, the narrator, we suddenly, like, he's been interspersed in, like, but he hasn't, like, spoken directly to the camera before. But Dr. John Kani at the very end, he's wearing like this UFO shirt, and he has a book in front of him, and he's just like, hey, the original version of Beyond the Light Barrier has contents that were conveniently removed from newer publications in like the 2000s. And then he starts to read passages from the original copy that he has in his hand. And it is the most fucking racist shit ever. It is it's fucking awful.
Oh boy.
It's so
real bad.
Shitty.
You could almost say, hey, this was written during apartheid South Africa.
Yeah, and
holy shit.
Yeah, this white woman, and I'm just like, I was like, so here's where I was like, oh my God, is this documentary going to sort of bookend the whole thing by explaining the sort of like new age UFO culty mentality and how it gets racist? And no, it's not really that. I mean, this is how the documentary ends, but it doesn't take time to explore the very real problem of this movement, or whatever you want to call it, the contactees and the space. It does not really dig into just the racism angle, which is a deep well of shit, but I think ought to be addressed. And I will at least credit them, because like this came out, this fucking smacked me upside that I was like, holy shit, I can't believe they're talking about this. This is the kind of thing that like in so many documentaries about people like this, you would just gloss over it. And yeah, they at least talk about it. And he talks about how much it fucking bothers him.
Yeah, like they do luckily do that, where he is like, do I have a problem with it? Hell yeah, I do. It is fucking awful and inexcusable. But it doesn't, it is a very short amount of time for the runtime of this 90-minute documentary.
Yeah, I feel like the thing that would have been truly amazing to see is have all this build up. It would have also kind of made some more sense with the narrator sort of like observing everything from outside. It would have like made this sort of like visual narrative sense too, to like suddenly be like, hey, now we are directly talking to this narrator, and he's going to like lay it down the problems that are like inherent in these beliefs. And it doesn't really do that. I mean, it addresses it, but like it just ends with like, also she was racist. Anyways, we'll see you later. Like,
yeah, but it was removed in future things, and it kind of, it doesn't hand wave it entirely, but it also
but it's like unhelpful to like not kind of examine it, I think, a little bit more. Because he even brings up like, why the fuck did Credo Mutwa have an association with this woman? And I don't think we really get a conclusion to that either.
No, that would like this. I guess where this brings me is that you started this episode by asking me my general vibe, and I think my overall takeaway from this documentary is it is fine, but it feels like there could be a much more interesting version of this if they like had a bit more that they were really driving at saying.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, it does. Like, I mean, again, the way it's framed, the whole documentary does seem to be in support of the extraterrestrial, quote unquote theory. It seems to generally support her side of the story. And then it like, nods towards the problems. And I would have loved to have just heard oh fuck, I have his name. Dr. John Kani. I would have loved to have heard him talk a bit more about just some of the most unabashedly vile, racist horse shit I have heard in recent memory. Like, South Africa, it's like settler colonial violence and apartheid, like fucking horrifying. And it's like, I don't know. It's very weird, especially right now with what's going on in the Middle East. It's like have these people just kind of not really spend too much time with this angle, because it's very much like it is deeply rooted in Elizabeth Klarer's beliefs and worldview here. And like I think it was also indicative in like the women, the South African women who are saying shit like overpopulation, something must be done, and that's the message of these alien visitors. It's very strange, and the documentary just almost feels incomplete, I guess. But I guess that's my review of it. I don't know. That's I think where I stand. It was all right.
Yeah. It wasn't like it's worth watching if you have an interest in these things and like this stuff of this era, because you do get quite a bit of like, I don't know, the kind of testimonials and people that I feel you miss a lot when you just read articles online, like you get a little bit more of that kind of stuff, of the kind of shoe leather of this kind of thing, than you necessarily will at all these other places. But it also doesn't feel like it's really trying to do a whole lot. So yeah.
This is just it's not an incompetent thing. It's not, total trash or anything, but it's wishy-washy.
I think that brings us to our kind of ending here, because you're getting very close to just doing the bit now.
Right.
So I feel we have to just get into it. So who is this documentary for first? I think this is for someone who has a passing interest in ufology, but like only watches stuff like this, like only watches like random documentaries. Like they'll watch the new thing that dropped on Hulu that was like produced by Spielberg, and like that kind of thing. They'll see this on Amazon Prime and be like, oh, this came out this year, that's a place that I haven't heard, okay. And then they'll get a general idea of some South African UFO cases, and then an ending that leaves them kind of going, huh? And then they'll move on with their day. Like it's weirdly inconsequential in a lot of ways.
I think this documentary is for people like you and me, for people who are skeptics who are invested in the UFO mythology. And I think it's for people who are interested in the contactee mythology and stuff. That's about as far as I can say. Otherwise, I don't know why you would watch this. It's another one of those things that like I feel like a person who is, I think certain types of people could watch this and get suckered into its bullshit. To Elizabeth Klare's bullshit more, I should say. So I guess in that way it's for new age UFO people too. I guess maybe. Yeah. Cause you can cheer whenever the South African apartheid ladies are on screen going like, something must be done about overpopulation, and Akon will do it or tell us how to do it. And then you can boo whenever the skeptic guy comes on and he's just like, my marriage is beautiful and hers is stupid.
Yeah.
So-
Is there any world where someone who's just a fan of the rapper Akon accidentally stumbles upon this documentary
I would hope so.
and enjoys it?
I would hope so.
Maybe that's who it's for.
I think it's for all the Akon fans out there who have, just generally, I guess.
You watch the music video for I'm on a boat,
There
and
you
then
go.
you watch this.
Yeah. Was that Akon?
It's Lonely Island with Akon, yeah.
Okay, nice. Cool.
So-
Yeah. So Akon fans, check it out. I think you're going to get a kick out of this documentary about not the Akon you're thinking of.
So Kyle,
Yeah.
how would you say this documentary falls on the fuck your
We
documentary
are really
scale?
running out of ways to say this phrase, but I'll do my best, okay?
Yeah.
Fuck your documentary.
Mine was literally just going to be fuck your documentary. Like
Very
the
neutral.
most
Yeah.
neutral. It is like this really feels like a Wikipedia article with a couple extra things.
Yeah,
It's
not a lot
you don't
going
get
on
that
here.
much more out of it.
It was kind of fun to watch. I wasn't bored or anything. But it was, I think we
Higher
pretty much
production
covered it.
value and a little more competent than some of the stuff we've watched for this show.
For sure.
But
Always-
not nearly as good as some other stuff.
Always pleasant for it to not be an absolute slog to like sit through. But
Yeah.
that if that's the best review I can give it, then it's lacking in many other areas. So yeah,
True.
That's my review.
All right. So I think that will probably wrap us up for this episode. Thank you all
Yeah.
for supporting the show. Let's take care of some business.
Sure.
If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us on Twitter at IGW Podcast.
You can follow us on Facebook.com/ItGetsWeirdPodcast.
And we're on all your favorite podcatchers from Stitcher to Google Play to Apple Podcasts to Spotify. If you listen to podcasts somewhere, look up It Gets Weird, and we're probably there.
Twitch.tv/ItGetsWeird. If you're listening to this on the Patreon right now, I am trying to actually get a fucking stream together this weekend. So if you hear this on Friday, look around Saturday or Sunday. I'm going to try and get something going. It's been a while. Life has been crazy, but I'm finally getting back into it. So check us out on Twitch. itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com. I actually happen to know that we do have some emails. So if you've emailed us, we will get to you soon. I promise. Just we didn't. Things have been all over the place scheduling wise. So we'll get to you. I know you're there. Thank you for emailing us and continue to send us stuff.
Because we're hungry.
We are very hungry. Patreon.com/ItGetsWeird. We have a $2 tier and a $5 tier. At the $2 tier, you get access to the main show 2 days early on Friday instead of Sunday. And wait, I said this out of order, but that's true for both the $2 tier and the $5 tier. Oh, God.
Yes.
You get the main show 2 days early on Friday instead of Sunday. You also get access to a Discord. We're hanging out, chatting with listeners of the show. You can talk to us directly on there. So whether you donate to either tier, you get those things. At the $2 tier, you get It Gets Weird TV, but right now we are at the start of season 2 of The X-Files. We just watched a very good episode of The X-Files. So check that out. We get together and we discuss it. Comes out every other Thursday. At the $5 tier, you get another bonus show that comes out on the off weeks of It Gets Weird TV. So you're getting bonus content every single week. We also have a $1 tier where you don't get anything out of it. You're just saying, hey, I like your show. Here's a tip. Thanks for doing what you do. Here's $1. If you can't donate, please tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your congressman all about It Gets Weird. I really botched that. I botched that one, but people get the gist. If you need to hear the Patreon thing, then go back to another episode and fast forward to the very end and you'll hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that'll wrap us up for this week. Thank you all for listening to the show. Thank you for continuing to support It Gets Weird in all its forms. This has been It Gets Weird, and I've been Nile.
And I'm Kyle signing out.
Peace.